Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Epic Human Podcast. I'm your host, Joe Blair, and thanks for listening today. First off, I want to briefly apologize in advance for the sound quality in this episode. I had my high-quality microphone plugged in and ready to go, but I failed to activate it. So this episode was recorded with my laptop microphone, which performed much better than I expected, but leaves a lot to be desired. Apologies, and I hope it's not too much of a distraction. I am excited, though, because today's episode features Sydney Thomas, a venture capital investor and head of operations with Precursor Ventures, a San Francisco-based pre-seed venture firm. Sydney is also the creator and host of the Be About It podcast, a podcast featuring entrepreneurs who are building companies that serve real people. I had the pleasure of first meeting Sydney at an Impact Mafia networking event in Oakland, an event for venture investors who are interested in positively changing the world. When I learned about her podcast, it was like a light bulb went off in my head. I had always fantasized about starting a podcast, but it had perpetually seemed like a far-off dream. I figured I needed to first become rich or famous or feel like I'd made it somehow. But sometimes all it takes is getting to know someone who is doing what you'd like to do, and it helps you realize that it is indeed achievable. So I'm incredibly grateful to Sydney for her inspiration, for her guidance, and for her friendship. And it's my great pleasure to feature her on today's podcast and learn more about her life. So without further delay, please give it up for an epic human, Sydney Thomas.
Hello, world, and welcome to the Epic Human Podcast. I'd like to welcome my guest, Sydney Thomas. Sydney is an investment associate and head of operations here at Precursor Ventures, a pre-seed firm based in San Francisco. Thank you, Sydney, for being with me today.
Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. So I think we're gonna talk about a lot of things, but I want to start by just asking you about your childhood. Where'd you grow up? What were you like as a kid?
Yeah. So I'm from San Diego, California. Born and raised, entire life, 18 years. Well, entire childhood.
Mm-hmm.
What was I like as a child? I went back to my elementary school recently, and I talked to my art teacher, and she's like, "You were just always an old soul."
Really?
Mm-hmm. And so I think that's a good way to characterize. Like, I wasn't really that amused by things that were happening in like any grade, and I was kind of like, I'm here to do my stuff, I'm here to make a few friends, and then I'm here to leave. So
and what was your family life like?
Oh, amazing. I love my parents. I mean, it's my mom, my dad, and my sister from my immediate family. I'm the oldest. My sister's 2 years younger than me.
Mm-hmm.
And my mom stayed at home with my sister and I. My dad is a kidney doctor, so he was always at work.
Mm.
But I had, like, the best childhood. I loved it. It was so chill. Like, Mom loved hanging out with us, which I don't think is true of all stay-at-home moms. I think some are like, okay, like, I'm done.
It's very true.
My mom probably also felt that way sometimes, but she never showed it. And so it just felt like a super caring, very hands-on relationship that I had with my mom.
Mm. And so I was actually born in San Diego.
No way.
Little known fact.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, on a military base in Oceanside.
Oh, cool.
And but I moved before I was like had memories. But I've gone back to San Diego a couple times. I lived there for a summer. Anyway,
Nice.
The weather is just unbelievably perfect all the time. Like, what's it like growing up like that and then visiting other parts of the world and just that compare and contrast?
You know, I just had this realization this morning that part of the reason why I lived in New York for 5 years, and part of the difficulty of my life there was that I am such a sun child. Like, I rise with the sun, I go to sleep with the sun. I've never liked evenings. I've always loved mornings. That's just who I am.
Yeah.
And so being in places where there is no sun for months on end is like literally draining to me. So it sucks. I also studied abroad in Scotland, and it was a similar thing where I actually really loved Scotland. I think it's an amazing country, and the culture is super cool. But by November, when the sun was setting at 2 p.m., I was just like, it was so hard. So that's just like my personality is, or I guess my gravitation is always towards the sun.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I remember that I was living there for a summer, and like it was, I'd say the first half of the summer I was just like in heaven every day, and then like after a while, like it was strange. Like it became like I would go outside and be like, oh, it's sunny again. Like it was just. It almost became like I was almost like bored of the sun after a while.
No,
I know. I say that like cautiously because I think because then I moved to other places like Vancouver and even here where I'm the same way. I just value the sun so much, and I'm so much more appreciative of it. So maybe tell us about after you left San Diego, where'd you go to school? Take us forward.
Yeah. So I went to Duke undergrad, and so I was in North Carolina for 4 years. And it was a really interesting time to be there. I got in right after the lacrosse case became a thing. And so I remember actually my family reunion, like my uncles were all just like, what are you doing? and I still decided to go. I did not cancel my admission or any of that stuff.
Right.
And so I feel like it was a lot of just like self-reflection for 4 years. It was a lot of like taking classes because when I came in, I also thought I wanted to do this one major or anthropology, and I got there and I was like, actually, I don't think I want to do anthropology, and I don't know what I want to do. And so it was just a lot of this process of elimination, like what it really speaks to me being Sydney, what do I want to do with the rest of my life? I know I don't want to do kind of like these boxed things that my parents think are the only options for me to do, like being a lawyer or a doctor, but I don't really know what else there is.
Yeah.
And so it was a lot of that. So, a little painful, but I think very, very valuable in that I came out on the other end like, okay, this is exactly what I want to do. And granted, that changed, but I felt like I had done enough research that I was very grounded in my decision.
And what was the decision? What was your major?
Yeah, so my major was public policy. I loved it. And my minor was in African and African American studies. And so combining the two was just awesome for me because I've always been this systems thinker. And so I was able to have that systems thinking like feedback from public policy, which I thought was much more systems and like thinking than even like a poli-sci major where you're just kind of thinking about like in ideologies and like in theory, and public policy is like what actually happened, why did it happen, how can we replicate or change that. And then with the African and African American Studies minor, I was able to like influx that with things that I was particularly excited about. So like with regards to the civil rights movement, why did that happen? With regards to mass incarceration, why is that happening? And so it was really fun just kind of like have that juxtaposition or layered experience of these different perspectives. And then post, I went into government. And
so just real quick, I just have a burning question in my mind. Might not go anywhere, but what attracted you initially to anthropology, and then what made you decide to switch?
Yeah. So I think what attracted me to anthropology was still the base level things that I got out of public policy and African American studies, was just like, why do humans do what they do?
Okay. Yeah.
They're so weird.
Yeah.
And all these civilizations are so random. Like, how did this happen?
Right. There's a common thread there.
Exactly.
But then what was not so attractive about it?
I think they still focus so much on theory. I did a study abroad in Ghana with my anthropology, with an anthropologist as the teacher, who was like the person who goes along with kids on trips for study abroad.
Yeah.
And I just remember being so unsatisfied with like the decisions he would come to. I'm like, okay, it felt like I was missing a piece of the puzzle. I was like, oh, okay, this is why people do what they do. But then there's also a big piece of this, which are structures that we're not really talking about, that also influence how people move and operate. It's not always just like a genetic thing that makes someone do something differently than somebody else. It's an incentive that was created by the government.
Gotcha. Hence the policy and like the shift from more theoretical and to more current and modern and practical. Okay, that's really interesting. And so then you went into government.
I went into government.
Yes. Okay, tell me about that.
The belly of the beast.
Yeah.
I think what I realized was that it was not as clean as I thought it would be. I guess on paper I was like, oh, okay, government does this because of this, and then they do that, and it's all within like a 2-year time frame or like a 6-month thing, and that's just things happen. Always, things are happening.
Right.
When I got there and I was like, nothing's happening. It's like people are running around saying things are happening, but I'm not seeing this bill that I'm working on getting passed. And that's what frustrated me. And so I was working on a federal piece of legislation, didn't get passed, got bored, and then was like, okay, well, who is doing stuff? And so worked on a programming team. So essentially people were implementing pilot programs of that same bill in different cities, and did that for about a year. And I similarly realized, like, this is also really cool, but I still don't feel like I'm doing the most impact as possible. And so transitioned into a separate role, whereas kind of straddling these two different worlds between the public world and the private world to try and see how those together could make things go faster and be larger scale, and got really excited about that work. And so started kind of getting an insight into the private sector world for my first time, and saw just how many opportunities there were in that space, and decided to go back to business school to really give myself even more time to learn up and understand, like, what is happening in this side of the pond, because I didn't really know and even really like allow myself to explore it in college, because I was like, oh, business people are so evil.
Right.
I never want to be in business.
I'm going to the government where people are good.
Exactly. And they are.
And
a
they
lot of them are.
Yeah, right.
And like, but it's a grind. And I was like,
why doesn't more get done?
Yeah. I think it's because of a good thing, which is that they don't want one person to co-opt an entire. They don't want authoritarianism,
right?
And so they've created all of these buffers to prevent that by any means necessary. And what then they prevent are all of these sub pieces, which is a lot of it's that innovation. Like you need to test something, at least with a little bit of. And have a little bit of conviction once you've tested that thing,
right? To
see if it could be an improvement to society. And so I think that's kind of the I guess missed opportunity, where the innovation isn't able to get done because we're afraid of any change being widespread change without the input of everyone. So I think that's a I don't know what the right word is, but they're in conflict.
Yeah.
I think they're naturally in conflict. And so it's really just like finding that balance that's really hard.
Gotcha. So it's necessarily slow and can head in the right direction theoretically, but you have to have the right kind of personality maybe to be able to, I don't know, have that kind of patience. I wouldn't really have that patience.
It's hard.
So then you went to business school and interacted with all the bad people. And, and what did you discover during that time?
They're not all bad.
Okay.
And I also went to Berkeley, which is like the place where I think everyone, at least they say this on the brochures, and when you get there, it's actually true. It's like everyone's actually interested in how what they're doing or what they might want to do impacts society or impacts other people. They're just very conscientious citizens, and that was awesome for me. I wanted to go somewhere where people really understood like how and cared about how what they did had a ripple effect. Right. And so it was really cool to go somewhere where all my colleagues did, and I felt like it was a place where I was able to make some amazing friends, which I was not expecting out of business school. And build relationships with folks who I really just admired and thought were doing awesome stuff.
Yeah. And that was your first time in the Bay Area.
That was my first time in the Bay.
Okay. And back to California.
Yay.
And then and so what did you I guess what was your thesis going into business school in terms of how you wanted to shift your career, and then how did that manifest, whether directly or indirectly?
Yeah. So it was wildly different.
Okay.
What I thought I wanted to do going into business school was work in a consumer packaged goods company, because when I was my last position where I was doing that public-private stuff, a lot of the private companies we were working with were those who had physical goods, because those are the ones who really understood the value of a brand and how consumers' perspectives or perceptions of that brand influence your bottom line. And so they wanted to improve their brand by working with public government, and in our case it was specifically with the education system and kids, to build their brands. And so I was like, oh, okay, well, they get it. So, and I know what I want to do is with people who get it.
Right.
So then I should work for one of them.
Right.
And so it was like somewhat logical. But then I started interning at CPG companies once I got here, and I was like, actually, this is not going to work. I started working at a few, and it's like, the vast majority of them are just so... Okay, that's a very sweeping statement. There were some that I just thought had a long way to go. They were also coming up against this innovation versus authoritarianism thing in these large companies, because I think there are a lot of similarities between really large companies and the government. And I was like, this isn't what I want. I left this on purpose. And so started going smaller and smaller and smaller in companies that I started interning for. And the smallest company that I interned for was called Soma Water, which is a CPG company, but also a tech company based in San Francisco. And I was able to get more insight into what it was 10 people at the time were doing, which was awesome. But then also, because it was so small, I got a lot of visibility to the board and to the investors. And I was like, oh, wow, okay, but investors get to do this on a crazy scale. They get to help us figure it out and work and make an impact. But they also have this huge opportunity to create other ecosystems that are making an impact all over the world. And that's what I want to do. Yeah. And so I came to that decision super late in the game. It's second semester, second year. And luckily I was running around enough that somehow a cold email to Frida Kapoor actually resulted in a response. And she introduced me to my current boss, which is Charles Hudson at Precursor Ventures.
Oh, interesting. I had kind of a similar experience at the first startup I worked at, where I met these venture capitalists. I'm like, so wait, what do you guys do?
Is this a joke?
To me at the time, they were like superheroes or something.
Yeah.
It was like, wait a second, you just kind of come in and you make an investment, and then you go do this for a whole nother company, and wait, how does this work? And it's just funny, the context of when you first experience something like that versus now it's our everyday and it's normal. So you met Charles, and when was this? And when did you start?
So I kind of stalked him for a while. So she introduced me to him in, I think, maybe April of 2016, so right before I graduated. And I was taking an internship or a part-time job with another startup that was also a CPG company and had some tech infused into it. And I really liked what they were doing too, but they were a startup, so they couldn't afford to hire me full-time. I was like, I don't care what you guys are doing. And but I was also I also would love to work with Charles part-time too during this time when I actually have this freedom to do that.
Sure.
And so I just kept calling him every couple of months. I was like, hey, so I heard maybe you were hiring, and I now have your phone number. And so eventually he agreed to let me hang out part-time towards the end of 2016. I started working at Precursor in August 2016.
Okay.
So I was doing both jobs, which was actually 2 full-time jobs because they're both startups. So it's just a ridiculous life.
Sure.
And so worked with him until the end of 2016 and got the offer to start full-time in 2017. And by that time, I realized, like, the other startup I was working with, I thought what they were doing was still really awesome, but I don't think I could give them exactly what they needed, which was a liaison between the board and the company, because they were just having like they had raised a lot of money from a lot of different people, and so they just had a lot of communication stuff that needed to be managed. I was like, well, that's not my skill set, and so working with Charles is awesome because it's literally just the two of us, so then I can do kind of like anything.
Yeah.
And so I was like, sounds great.
Sure.
Sign me up.
So tell me about the firm. Tell me about what you guys do, and then later, like, what you do day to day. Yeah.
So Precursor Ventures is the pre-seed investment firm. So we're investing in companies, I like to say pre-everything. And so it's like literally, like they have an idea and a vision, a dollar and a dream. And so we invest in that dream with conviction, with our average check size about $250,000, and use that to help them get to their next stage. And sometimes that's 6 months from now, and that's like a launch, and then we can invest more and start helping them interact with other investors to help them bring on even more capital. And sometimes it's like in 6 months they realize they want to pivot, and they keep working heads down for the next year or so, and like, cool, that was awesome too. Now what you've pivoted to is even better, and we're excited to back you and still introduce you to other investors. And so really it's just like the first check. Whatever your, like, I guess, like, perception of a first check investor is, that's what we try to do. And so we invest in about 20 companies a year, and we are on Fund 2 now. And so it's like, it's still a startup, but I guess it's not anymore. It's like one of those, I don't know what you call it, but still just two of us.
Yeah, that's a lot of companies
it's
in a
lot
year.
Of companies.
Yeah, between two people.
It's a lot, and so it's a lot of meetings. So I guess getting into my day-to-day, it's a lot of meetings. It's a lot of like managing my inbox. A lot of like making sure that our portfolio gets what they need. We have them all in their Slack channel, and so I get pings. Like this morning was answering like ping after ping after ping, like, hey, we actually were thinking of using this service instead of this one. Like, what do you think? And do we have a connection there? And I'm now also starting to look at another software altogether to manage like an online wiki page for our founders to have more like in a space to hold all of the quality information that they share with each other. Then also I had a pitch with a woman today, and I went to Google Demo Day today, and so it's just kind of just a lot. And so but it's fun. It's like every couple of minutes you're putting on a different hat, you're doing something different, and that's my favorite work, where it's just always, I really like autonomy. It's kind of like doing my own thing,
right? And
I also really like doing a lot of things. So I've been able to pick up, some additional things along the way too. Like I've launched this Women of Color in VCs, like community, where we do dinners. We just had one of our dinners last night at K4 Capital, and doing some more small group dinners with friends of mine in VC. And then also joined the board of Next Gen, which is a community of young VCs. And so it's just like, just going.
Yeah. No, you're really good at that. And in fact, we met at a VC networking event, and then you invited me to a dinner, and that's when I learned a bit more about you and a bit about your podcast.
Yeah.
And maybe you could tell us about the Be About It podcast.
That's so true. I forgot to mention that too.
You do a lot.
I do a lot. So Be About It podcast is, what I realized is one of my most motivating, like, emotions is anger.
Okay.
And so Be About It came out of an anger.
I never would have guessed that, because you're such a delightful person.
Thank you. Okay,
but anger motivates you. So how did that motivate you in this case?
Yes. So I was just angry with the types of companies that people kept writing about. I'm like, all these companies are boring. I don't really resonate with any of them. Like, can we write about stuff or people who are doing awesome stuff? Because they exist. I know they do. And so I think once I dug into that a little more, I realized that my anger was not just with like this vast generalization of tech. It was really like the types of companies and the markets that these companies were targeting that was really upsetting to me. And I realized that I was much more interested in companies that were serving the everyday person. And so I define that as a person who's making under $100,000 a year, which is 80% of the United States. So it's a lot of people.
Yeah.
And I developed an investment thesis around this where I was like, I know these companies exist. I know they could do well. Some of the awesome ones who have done well is Gusto, for example. They serve small businesses that are not like the Googles of the world to help them grow. Etsy is another one that I really love, where they're serving small, also like sole proprietorships, like a mom or a dad who's just, or person who's building something in their backyard and wants to get money for it because it's amazing.
Yeah.
And so I was like, how do I make sure these businesses are getting profiled? And so that's how I came up with the idea of Be About It. And so on it, I interview founders who are at the earliest stages. So they're super, super early. They're not like hot yet. But I think what they're doing, they're onto something really exciting.
Yeah. And
so I interview them and help kind of broadcast them to the world to make sure that other folks know that entrepreneurship isn't just what TechCrunch writes for, and TechCrunch has great articles sometimes, so I don't want to hate on them too bad.
Yeah.
But it's not just what you see on Twitter. It's actually like a lot of folks who have like 5 followings on Twitter, but are doing awesome stuff on their real job, which is a startup building in like Minneapolis, Minnesota, or Oakland, or the South Bay, or Florida.
Yeah. So first off, I'm a big believer in this thesis as well, and our firm is Investors in Gusto. So just want to mention we did not pay you to say that, but do appreciate it. And yeah, I mean, well, first off, I love the podcast. I listen, as you know, I listen to all of them, and I think you do a really great job with it. I guess my question just for you is, in starting this podcast, you went into it probably with a certain set of expectations. How are those expectations not met, whether it was kind of on the positive side or the negative side, or just how has the experience of podcasting been for you personally?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say they've not been met by, I guess I thought that once I started the podcast that it would be so easy to find other people who fit this thesis that once I get one episode out, all of these entrepreneurs who are doing stuff that I've talked about in my podcast will just come to me.
Sure.
And they are busy building. And so they're not flocking to me, which is totally fair. And so it's been a lot more outbound than I thought it would be, which is not a bad thing. Like, it's been actually really fun to do that again. That's like, I'm not afraid of that, cold emailing people who I think are awesome. And so it's been a lot of that. Or finding a like second or third mutual connection to that person who I can then ask for an intro to this other person. And so that's been harder. It's just taken more time of mine to find people and invest in making sure that I develop those relationships. I would say the flip side of that is something that I thought that has gone much better than I thought would have. Something that has gone much better than I expected is it's been like, once you get going, it's actually pretty easy to do it.
Right.
Like I actually was like, oh man, this is going to be so hard, because everyone says it's like, nobody really says it, but you just assume anything new is going to be so hard.
Yeah.
And it's actually like, it is hard, but it's not impossible. And like, once you figure out your rhythm and get the right people to work with you, like, it's actually totally doable. Like, and so that's been really awesome. Just have like have a great producer. My designer was amazing, and it's been doable.
Yeah. I would share that sentiment. Well, so first off, I should mention at that first dinner we had together, group dinner, when you were talking about your podcast, that was a big inspiration for me personally, because it was the first time I'd known someone personally who had started a podcast, and to me it had always been this far off thing that only celebrities do.
Yeah.
And then when I met you and you were doing it, I thought, well, maybe it's not something I need to do in like 5-10 years. Maybe I could do it now. And so thank you for the inspiration, but also thank you for the practical advice along the way. And I agree, like, my goal for this podcast was like, I'm going to try to do 4 this year.
That's awesome.
Like, and I'm already at double that in terms of what I've recorded. And it does take far less time once you get it all set up and effort than I would have thought. And so this pace has just been way faster than I expected, but it's mainly just because it's fun and
it's true.
It's enjoyable. What have you learned kind of about yourself from podcasting, or how has it helped you, like, in any personal way?
Yeah, that's a good question. Something that I learned about myself, and I guess I already knew this, it's not new news, but it's just true, is that I'm not the best researcher.
Okay.
So a lot of times I'll look at these people's profiles and I'm like, oh man, this person's awesome. I'm going to interview them. Then I get in touch with them and we schedule time. And I've just forgotten about it until like literally 2 minutes before I'm scheduled to interview them. And I'm like, oh shoot.
Yeah.
I know this person is awesome because I reached out to them.
Right.
I know what they do generally, but I don't know who they are. And that's been something that I think I've gotten feedback most recently about. I was like, actually, you should probably just, like, figure out, like, why you want to talk to them, like, before you talk to them. I was like, oh, you're so right. I actually should. And I think, actually, I mentioned before we started recording that one of my best episodes, I didn't realize why it was so good, but actually, I kind of know. It was an episode of somebody who I've been, like, stalking for years. I've been wanting to talk to this person literally, like, since I was in business school. I've always thought what he was building was awesome.
Oh, cool.
And so I think that really came out in the podcast in a way that it doesn't always in others.
Sure.
Even though I think the other people are just as awesome, I just haven't researched them for 2 years. And so I think, trying to do that better on a more structured timeline, so maybe research them for like an hour at least.
Right.
And so that's been something that I'm learning about myself. I just love doing things like in the moment, and right. I think that's like a really good thing for a lot of what I do, because that means I don't overthink things. I'm a doer.
Right.
But that also means that when I do need to sometimes overthink things, I don't. I need to take that step and like actually force myself to be like, okay, Sydney, like, what are you doing?
Right. Adjust that dial slightly.
Exactly.
In the other direction. Yeah, I had a podcast recently where the night before the podcast, the person's partner sent me just a list of all this like wonderful dirt on the person. Not real dirt, but just like ask him about, this time when he was in high school and he did this crazy thing. And so I was able to throw those out in the podcast, and the guy who's interviewing was just like, whoa, I guess you've been talking to some people. So it can be useful.
That's awesome.
So we're going to jump to the rapid fire section.
Cool.
And first, inquiring minds want to know.
What's up?
What do you do for fun?
Oh, well, that's actually hard to answer.
I think I remember you saying something about dance.
I do dance. You're right. I love dancing. That's what I do. So I'm a member of this class. It's Nieves de Witzel. I think that's how you pronounce her last name. She's a dance instructor in Berkeley, does Afro-Brazilian dance. This is her life's work. She's absolutely brilliant. And she has these 2-hour-long dance classes that will leave you just like in shambles on both Wednesday nights and Saturday mornings. And it literally makes my whole week when I'm able to go.
Wow. So. Awesome. that research paid off. What in your life has been your favorite mistake? And by that I mean like a negative experience, whether it was like something you did, or a mistake you made, or just something bad that happened to you that ended up benefiting you kind of down the road.
That's a good one. Favorite mistake. I mean, I think I would say some people would call this mistake, which is just like not getting into tech quicker. I think a lot of people who are here have been here in this ecosystem for decades, and I am not. I've been here for a year and a half. And I think it's been amazing because I'm able to like create all of these parallels between like what is going on here versus what is going on in New York versus in government versus what is going on in DC in nonprofit or education or finance more generally. And so I was able to have this completely different lived experience that I think is just so, sometimes feels like a burden, but I think more oftentimes than not feels like a huge blessing because I'm then able to have this perspective that a lot of my colleagues aren't.
That's a great answer. I feel that way sometimes, like coming from more of like a engineering, like not computer science, but like mechanical engineering, industrial tech, like having worked on factory floors, like sometimes, especially in the early days when I was like applying for VCs, they're like, "What? You don't have a CS degree? Like, what do you? Why would anyone hire you?" But now it's, I do think there's value to that. So anyway, I share that kind of idea. What is your most unpopular opinion?
Oh my God, I have so many.
Oh, good. This will be easy. Sometimes it's hard. Might be hard to pick one.
It'll be hard to pick one. I mean, I guess it's getting more popular now, so maybe I won't say that one. Because that one's just like, San Francisco isn't the bee's knees. Like, there's other things that are really cool.
There's other places in the world,
Other stuff to do. What's another one? I guess the ones that are coming to mind are so basic. Like the other one is just that like tech people don't dress well, and like it's annoying.
It annoys you?
It annoys me.
Oh, okay.
And I think it's like this fake sense of like I don't care when you actually do care because like the entire sector is built on the back of FOMOism. So it's just kind of like it's like I guess it's one of those things where it's just own it. Like, be weird.
Be
that's
who you
cool.
are.
Instead of this, like, oh, I must be weird, but in a Googler sort of weird because that's the only weird that is acceptable.
Right.
It's just like, wear fancy dresses and heels if you want. Or, like, wear anything, but don't just wear what everybody else is wearing.
Yeah. You don't have to have the carefully selected hooded sweatshirt that Zuckerberg wears.
Allbirds and Patagonia, like so many other clothes.
Yeah. I don't want to hate on Allbirds too much, but
they're a great brand. I'm just saying there's other shoes.
I think they're probably a great brand, a great company, but for most people, I've noticed they don't fit like the foot very well. Like I don't know, it just I don't really get it either. Sorry, Allbirds people who are listening. What's a favorite quote that you just really enjoy or you live by?
Okay, I just got this pillow. Not just, I've had it for a while, but it's by Sada Shakur, and it says it's essentially like I forget it verbatim, but essentially it says like if you're not going crazy, you're not paying attention. And so I really love it because I think it allows you the freedom to feel a little crazy with all the things that are going on in the news, all the things that are going on in society, all the things that are going on in the world. And I think it then allows you this emotion
Mm-hmm.
to feel angry, which is kind of what I was saying before. Like, it's a very motivating emotion
Mm-hmm.
that I think a lot of times we suppress a lot because it's not socially acceptable emotion. And so I think that it's very inspiring to me to just remember that this is weird. Like, this is not normal.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of what is happening is not normal. And I don't need to make excuses for it. I don't need to normalize it. It doesn't need to exist.
Mm-hmm. And is there anything in particular around like what's crazy or like? I mean, is it around like injustice?
There's so much.
Yeah.
But today I was listening to a podcast. Do you listen to? I think it's called. One of our founders just sent it to me, and it's amazing. It's a WNYC podcast, and they're essentially profiling kids in Rikers in New York.
Oh, Ear Hustle? No, that's the one the
Ear
local
Hustle's
here.
really good.
Okay.
But it's a different one.
It's a different one. Okay, I'll check it out. Yeah.
I'll send it to you afterwards.
Okay.
And I was listening to this one girl who was just like, didn't even steal anything. She was in prison jail for 3 years, waiting trial, and put in solitary confinement for months on end.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just kind of like, this is so disturbing.
Yeah.
And so it's just stuff like that, like, it's actually happening. You actually do need to pay attention to it. You can't turn a blind eye.
Right.
And it sucks.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And a lot of people don't want to face that reality because it's uncomfortable or just because it doesn't affect them day to day or they don't see it day to day. But that's a good quote. Is there any influential book that you've read that you either give to people or that you just think of fondly?
There's so many good ones. I'm trying to think of one that I read recently. So I actually read books for pleasure, very less for like work or business.
Sure, it doesn't have to be nonfiction. It could be fiction.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I was just listening to this. I just read this book. I also forget the name. It's like some Winter's in the title by Isabel Allende, and so she's from Chile.
Mm.
And she wrote this novel about these like 3 strangers who somehow, those novels, they kind of always have the same story. It's like 3 strangers, and they always kind of end up like co-mingled in some way because of one unfortunate event.
Mm.
And it's just, I love reading that book because it's just like such a cool way to like remember that, like, I don't know, that people are complicated. Like in that book, everyone's really complicated and surprisingly so. And it was just a lot of fun to read. And then there's another one that's actually on my desk, and that one is, I think it's called We Are All Refugees. I don't actually remember what it's called. But essentially it's a similar book in that it chronicles all these people from different parts of the world who are all refugees. If you just change what the I guess description is, the conventional description you would think defines a refugee, and actually think of it more broadly as just like someone who is away from their home and whatever that home is. And so that one was really, really good to read too.
Very cool. I'll check those out.
Yeah. Sorry, I totally forgot all their names.
That's fine. We can do that and put them in the show notes afterwards, so people can find out. How can people find you and your podcast?
Yes.
How do they get in touch?
Well, you can read all my crazy thoughts on Twitter. I'm at SydneyPage10. And you can find my podcast on Twitter too, at the Be About It Pod. And also, I try to keep my website somewhat up to date, and so my website's just www.sydneypagethomas.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you for your time today. Thank you for being a personal inspiration for me and for this podcast.
Aww.
And it was great to talk to you today. And thanks for coming on.
Aw, thanks for having me. It was so fun.
And thanks everybody for listening.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Epic Human Podcast. Please remember to like and subscribe to this podcast on whatever app you happen to be using. And if you want to keep up to date on the latest Epic Human Podcasts, please follow us on Twitter or Facebook at Epic Human Pod. And if you have any ideas for guests or feedback on the show, please reach out. I would love to hear from you. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.